here I am telling other people what to do, because you were mentioning earlier the power of telling your story and what it does for you. But with that being said, exactly like you just said, I caught myself telling other people to do these things. In my mind, I'm a fraud. But that ended up helping me in the long run, because I'm like, ooh, I told them, and I'm like pretending like I do all this stuff that I tell them to do.
Yeah.
But then eventually I started actually doing it myself out of ego to not look like I'm full of crap.
Now, when I went into treatment, I let obviously my family know, my kids, But as far as my friends, people I used to work with, the cops, I only let a couple people know. So this guy called me. I won't say his name, but he called me, and I was about 3 weeks into treatment. He said, "Hey, man, how's it going?" I said, "I'm doing great. I feel great." He said, "Look, some of the guys that you used to work with are asking. They know something's up. The rumblings and shit like that." And he said, "They keep coming to me. What's going on with Pat?" He said, "Do you mind if I tell them you're in treatment?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't have my ego anymore.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
And we have a gentleman by the name of Patrick Fitzgibbons.
Correct.
Got it right?
You got it, dude.
All right.
First try.
You have a good radio voice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one that you choose to use. And thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, it's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message, right, Ben?
That is correct, sir.
Right, Patrick?
Right.
How you doing?
I am doing great, man. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, so this was a very impromptu.
Yeah, we just threw it together. Let's do this.
Yeah, so Patrick came by here to Rock Recovery Center to do a tour, and we got to chatting, and Patrick has a podcast, and why don't you tell us what that is?
It's called CJ Evolution, Criminal Justice Evolution. Been around for a little over 8 years.
Nice.
And, it's great. I love it.
So it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, all the, Alexa, you can say, "Alexa, play CJ Evolution."
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's on all the major platforms.
I wonder if ours does that.
You can program, you can set it up to do that. You have to apply to Alexa through the app or something like that. But I did it about 2 years ago, so I do that, man.
Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So CJ Evolution, go check that out. It's tailored more towards first responders.
It is first responders, veterans, but really anybody can listen to it because I talk about health and wellness, recovery. I know you guys are big advocates for that with what your work. But yeah, it's the main focus is on the first responder veteran community, but anybody can get anything out of it.
You know who would be a good guest for him is Johnny Rios.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I meant to bring him up earlier.
Yeah, we'll connect you and this guy, Johnny Rios. He came on here probably a month ago, and he has a program. Oh, crap. What's it called?
It's a cool name, too, man. Oh.
Oh, it's so cool. We remember it.
I forgot the other day, and I came up with it. It'll hit me at some point.
It begins with a V.
No, it doesn't.
No? All right.
Later on during lunch, we'll remember.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll get it.
I'm going to pull it up now.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll connect you with him. But yeah, so we wanted to bring you on the show. Just talk a little bit about yourself and, what you're doing now. And we'll talk about your podcast, too. And just go from there. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I spent the majority of my career or life as a cop. I did 23 years in between two agencies in Colorado. I retired in 2019. Before that, I was in the military, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes with the 82nd Airborne down at Fort Bragg. I think it's called Fort Liberty now. In 2019, I retired from law enforcement. And I kind of lost my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore. I've spent most of my adulthood in some uniform serving in some capacity. And so when I retired, I thought, law enforcement is behind me. It's in the rearview mirror. But as time went on, I kind of lost my identity, who I was. A lot of people struggle with that, where they're going in life. And I was doing some things on the side before I retired, like teaching. I, as an adjunct professor at University of Colorado, teaching in the criminal justice department. Besides that, I really didn't have any direction. I didn't know what I was, was going to do. I'm still fairly young at the time. And so I started getting depressed. My wife and I at the time, we traveled, did all that stuff, but I slowly was, getting more and more depressed. Started drinking more, just heading down that dark path. My dad died about 6 months after I retired. I was very close to my father. He was a military guy. He was a lawyer. He went to the hospital one day and never came out. He died from congestive heart failure, so I was really close to my dad. I lost my mom. I was close to in my late 20s. She died of cancer. So now my parents are gone. And I have siblings too, so it hit them hard too. And so further depression. My wife and I started having problems, started drinking more. And then the one thing that really was the catalyst in my life is that it was December 2020, when my son, who was in the Air Force, I told you guys that earlier, he came home, and this was in Colorado. He came home for leave. We had all the family together. My wife at the time, we had a blended family. She had daughters. I had my daughter and son, and during the holidays, so everybody was home. And I remember one morning, shortly after Christmas, one of my stepdaughters yelled at me to get downstairs. So I came downstairs and I saw my son on the kitchen floor lying on his back, and obviously run over to him, and he's unconscious. And so I'm trying to get him revived. He's in and out of consciousness, and I told my wife, obviously call the paramedics, get him over here. I was blessed because I lived and worked in the same town, which was really easy because the paramedics got there fairly quickly. So they get over there, and now mind you, this is on the heels of COVID, so they got to take a little time with response and stuff like that. But they got there fairly quickly, and so they get there, they're loading him up. He's in and out of consciousness. I asked my stepdaughter, who called for me, what happened, and she said, I don't know. He just came up from the basement. His bedroom was in the basement, and just fell over. So I'm thinking, it's a medical. Again, in and out of consciousness. They get him on the gurney. They put him in the bus or the ambulance. And before my wife and I head to the hospital, I go downstairs and check his room, which is downstairs, and he's just vomited everywhere. And I was like, okay, it's a medical. They're going to take care of him. So we get to the hospital. I'm finally able to see him in the ER, and I'm like, what happened, buddy? And he's like, well, I just came up the stairs and I fell over. And I said, well, I know some of these ER doctors are going to take care of you. About that time, when I was leaving his room, I get a text from my stepdaughter who found him and said, you need to call me. So I call her, and she said, when I was cleaning Devin's room, my son's name is Devin, I found some suicide notes. So he had attempted suicide, and that just hit me. I was like, holy crap. I mean, me being a first responder, I didn't see some of that. I'm going through all this shit in my mind. I'm sorry if I cussed.
No, it's fine.
I'm going through all this stuff in my mind thinking, what did I miss, And I did miss some things, some behavioral things he was exhibiting. But anyway, the hardest thing I had to do was go back into his room and say, hey, did you try to hurt yourself? Did you try to kill yourself? And he said, yeah, Dad, I did. And, we're both crying and upset. And I said, well, they're going to take care of you. They're going to take care of you. And the Air Force did, because 30 years ago when I was in the military, in the Army, if something like that happened, they'd a lot of times kick you out, if you have any kind of mental issues. But they did. They took care of him, and he got the help he needed, and he's thriving, But after that, I continued to fall. I was blaming myself for what happened. I was drinking heavily. Just depressed, isolating, all the stuff you guys know. That's red flags. And so, wife at the time were having problems. Lost my dad. My son attempted suicide. What next? So, again, I'm distancing myself, all this stuff. And so there was a point where my wife said, why don't you go to Arizona? I got a lot of family in Arizona. And she said, why don't you go down there and take some time and relax? So I went to Arizona, came back, and she wanted a divorce. So it's just like the perfect storm in my world. So I went through that, contentious divorce. I ended up staying with my younger brother for a time. And, just a rough period in my life. I was deteriorating not only mentally, but physically. I lost a lot of weight. I tell people, my life at that time was like Groundhog Day. You ever see that movie? Every day is the same. So I would wake up, wait for the liquor store to open up, go get my shit, get tanked before noon, and then just rinse and repeat. That was my cycle. Until one day, I remember I was sitting in my brother's yard, and I was looking. He had a big yard with a shed in the back, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to kill myself in that shed." And so I started planning that. Started ruminating on that. And so I had a date, and the date came. I was going to off myself, and at the last minute, of course, I'm drunk. The last minute, I say, screw it. I'm going to go up to my bed and lay down, and have my gun, or one gun. I have a lot of them. And had it to my head, and crying and upset, and it's those two voices in your head. One of them is you're a piece of shit. You're divorced yet again. I've been married twice. Your son went through this. You missed all that, and the other voice was like, you still got a lot of life to live. You still have much to be grateful for. So, put my gun down, picked up my phone, called my sister, and said, "Hey, I need some help. I want to hurt myself. I want to kill myself." So she comes over. Long story short, I get to the hospital, check myself in, which was a humbling experience because usually I'm the guy on the other end. As a cop for many years, I'm dropping people off at the hospital. Now I'm the one, needing help. And about half an hour into the process, I'm like, I'm not fucking staying here. I'm not doing this. I need to be with first responders. I need to be with like-minded people like me. And so checked out. My sister's pissed, but I was right back in the same boat, where I agreed to go get help, but then I got there and I was like, my ego and fear got in the way. And so I checked myself out, but I knew I needed to get help. I was in a bad place. And I have a show, thanks for mentioning it. So throughout my contacts, I knew there was a place down in Florida, but I couldn't remember the name of it. And so started making some calls, and found out it was FHE Health and Shatterproof, and found out, that they were able to help me. And so within 24 hours, 48 hours, I was down in Florida, in Deerfield Beach, getting the treatment. And about halfway through my treatment, I was feeling good and feeling great. And I knew you guys were in recovery. That feeling is, man, it's such a good feeling. And I knew I wanted to work in behavioral health. And so long story short, got back to Colorado. And about 3 or 4 months later, I got offered a job. And I've been with FHE ever since, and I love it. I'm very passionate about I'm more passionate now than I ever was as a cop, being empathetic, not just for first responders who are suffering, but really anybody who's suffering from addiction and mental health challenges. That's my story, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that. And thank you for being vulnerable and authentic about it, too. Like talking about suicide
absolutely,
and stuff like that is, I think it's important for people to get on here.
Absolutely.
And like, if you're watching on YouTube, and I bring this up all the time when it is the case, like if you look at you look like a well put together, healthy man, like you got your shit together. And to come out and like be honest about the struggles that you've had, I think a lot of men are afraid to come out with that stuff.
Absolutely.
And when you look at a guy like you, you're willing to do that, it says a lot, man. It really does.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's in a weird way, and I'm sure you guys understand, but for the listener out there, I mean, it's therapeutic for me too to tell my story. It helps me, But yeah, I mean, I talk to people like you all the time, you both, and especially men. They view vulnerability, at least in the first responder realm, they view vulnerability as a weakness. It's not a weakness; it's a strength. It's you have to be vulnerable. Humility. Now, you don't want to be vulnerable all the time, but in instances like trying to convince people to get help and take care of themselves, and if you can share a story of your background, that helps people. I mean, it helps people.
I have a couple questions too. Some stuff that you brought up, some bullet points stuck out in my head that I'd like your insight on from your experience. Just a few seconds ago, you mentioned since you've gone to treatment and now you're working in it, the mental health side, you used the word empathy. You said something else. I can't recall exactly what you said, but being in law enforcement back then, has your perspective on dealing with addicts and alcoholics changed? And I was just wondering, like, you've probably gotten to see an evolution of maybe the way law enforcement treats addicts and alcoholics. Because I do think, with more awareness and education, like the I've being an interventionist as well, I've been in quite a few situations over the years, even one just recently where I was dealing with Riviera Beach Police, and all the officers I dealt with were amazing.
Yeah.
I had a guy recently too, a real close friend he was a military suicidal ideation, lost some buddies in Afghanistan, and we're at a meeting, and he just at the beginning of the meeting blurts out, "I want to kill myself. Can somebody?" We called, that was Lake Clark Shores, I think, police department. They sent 2 guys out that were on point with the mental health stuff, and I just, and I've seen the opposite too, to be honest with you, where I've been in situations where and this is happens less often nowadays. But where they've just treated the individual like trash. So I was just wondering your perspective on that.
Well, that's a great question. I think agencies differ. Cultures differ in departments. I think it's gotten a lot better. Most officers go through what they call CIT training, which is crisis intervention training. I went through that years ago, and that gives the officer the tools to communicate with somebody who's struggling. Now, is that going to help all the time? No, but it's a good start. But yes, I'm much more empathetic now than I ever was. I mean, I came from a different generation, where, when I was a young cop, it was, I'm going to ask you once, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to take you. Now, that might be the case in certain circumstances, but yes, I think officers, first responders, not just cops, but fire, EMS, corrections, we need to be much more empathetic to people who are suffering. And again, for me personally, I've been on the other side. So I'm much more empathetic with people who are struggling. Again, not just first responders, because it's addiction. And especially now, all the shit that they have, fentanyl and all this other stuff that's highly addictive. I mean, people need help. A lot of people are struggling. About 40% of first responders out there, 40% are struggling from mental health challenges, addiction, or both. That's the number we know about. So imagine what's not getting reported. So my guess is that number is much higher. So, but yeah, I hope I answered your question. I mean, it comes down to training. Officers are constantly training. They're constantly honing their skills. I always told people I'd much rather talk my way out of a situation as a cop than to use force. Now, sometimes you have to use force, but a lot of times it's communication. It's slowing down. Okay, a lot of times people just want to vent, so listen to somebody, whether an addict or not, let them vent a little bit, as long as they're not posing a threat to themselves or somebody else. But yeah, it begins with good communication skills, properly trained officers, and we're constantly, or we should be constantly evolving and getting better at that. Because when I was a cop, dude, when I was a young cop, we weren't going to a lot of mental health crisis calls. We weren't administering Narcan to people who were ODing. But that's part of our job now. Right, wrong, or different. You might not like it, but that's the reality of it. The correctional system in the United States is the largest provider of mental health treatment for people. That's the reality. So I think in a lot of instances, we need to do a better job at making sure our officers are properly equipped, can have good communication skills to deal with the issues and challenges we have in society, which seem to be growing. But we have to be able to evolve and pivot with the changes.
Yeah. When you were, so you started the podcast 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of the seeming, struggles that you were having were 5 years ago, roughly?
Yeah, 5 years ago. Towards the latter part of my career, I started to get very depressed. I was starting to drink heavily.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably about 5 years.
What was, I'm just, I guess, inquiring about, you have this podcast and it's you're really, trying to reach the, first responders, criminal justice and stuff like that. When you're going through these struggles and stuff, did it ever cross your mind, I have all these people that I've interviewed or that I've had on my show or maybe been on their shows, or I have all this whole group of people that I could probably reach out to today, and you chose not to and ultimately ended up reaching your sister. Why do you think that was?
Biggest thing?
Yeah.
Fear. Well, two things. Ego. I'll put ego first.
Yeah.
And fear. For me, it was my ego. Here, like you said, on the outside, this guy's got his shit together. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people struggle with that, and I was one of them. I mean, what are people going to say about me? What are people going to? I was basically the guy on shows giving advice to people. Oh, you got to take care of yourself, and I wasn't friggin' doing it.
Yeah,
I was being a hypocrite. What are people going to think of me? That's the biggest thing with me, is that the ego, hubris, whatever you want to call it. And then it was the fear. I think they go hand in hand. Until I fell and I, was in that dark hole and experienced it. And I started to, all right, I have to really start preaching what I'm saying to people, but that was the biggest thing, it was just my ego.
I love the fact that you just used the word hypocrite, because that was a major part of my recovery process where, here I am telling other people what to do, because you were mentioning earlier the power of telling your story and what it does for you. But with that being said, like exactly like you just said, I caught myself telling other people to do these things, and in my mind, I'm a fraud. But that ended up helping me in the long run, because I'm like, ooh, I told them, and I'm like pretending like I do all this stuff that I tell them to do.
Yeah.
But then eventually I started actually doing it myself out of ego to not look like I'm full of crap. So in a way, like, while ego kind of destroyed me in the beginning, it actually sometimes, please don't rely just on ego, because that will eventually kill you, I believe. But once in a while, ego will save you too, in a positive way. Yeah.
Well, so and it makes you stronger and more resilient, But yeah, I was a hypocrite, like you said, and now I have a totally different take. Now, I remember when I was about 3 weeks into my recovery down in Shatterproof at FHE, and I had a guy that called me. Now, when I went into treatment, I let obviously my family know, my kids, but as far as my friends, the people I used to work with, the cops, I only let a couple people know. So this guy called me. I won't say his name, but he called me, and I was about 3 weeks into treatment. He said, "Hey, man, how's it going?" I said, "I'm doing great. I feel great." And he said, "Look, some of the guys that you used to work with are asking. They know something's up. The rumblings and shit like that." He said, "They keep coming to me. Hey, what's going on with Pat? What's going on with Pat?" He said, "Do you mind if I tell him you're in treatment?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't have my ego anymore. Of course, I was retired, but still, reputation and stuff. And that was powerful for me because I wasn't afraid. Look, and I tell people, anybody who's going to give you shit for going into treatment and helping yourself, you don't need those people in your life.
Right.
I'm sorry. You don't. And did I lose a lot of friends, or, I haven't contacted them? Yes. The people in my life right now need to be there, need to be in my life right now because they're lifting me up. They're not bringing me down. I tell people this all the time, and this is not a dig on law enforcement or the first responder community, but law enforcement is an inherent toxic profession. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it because we just deal with, people don't call cops when everything's great. It's when shit hits the fan. And that rubs off on you over a career. It did for me. So you get this myopic, kind of cynical view of the world, but that's not the real world. I learned most people are good people. They have their struggles. But it took me a long time. Now, again, that's not a dig on law enforcement. The brave men and women who serve, they do just that. But it's not, the life is not just cynical people, and people evil, and so it took me a while to change.
That was bringing me to my next bullet that I had thought of earlier, where I wanted to ask you, because you said that you thought law enforcement was behind you. And that's when your drinking took off, correct?
Yeah.
So somewhere in there?
Yeah.
So my question for you is going to be, A, there's a brotherhood, I imagine, with law enforcement.
Absolutely.
B, living in that chaos. Because I always try to ask myself, like, what am I doing in my life today that fills a void that maybe I'm not aware of? And if it went away, would I be okay? So, like, you're thinking it's behind you, but then at the end of the day, I'm like, man, you must have been in a lot of like adrenaline-filled situations daily, and then all of a sudden you're like, humbug. Life's kind of boring when you're at peace and not at war, so to speak, and did that play a role?
It did. Like I said, I went through an identity crisis where, I wasn't, in that high-speed environment. But I've learned to adapt over time. Of course, I'm getting a little older. I can't be doing all that stuff anymore. But yeah, I went through where you're not going call to call to call. People aren't calling you, and you're dealing with these high stress situations. But it's also not good for your body either. When you're dealing with those high stress, those ups and downs, and But yeah, I struggle with that.
What I'm asking, so I could get insight for our clients, actually, what was it? You mentioned identity crisis, because one of the things that we see here a lot of times, for instance, we'll have guys that have been out of the military for 10 plus years.
Sure.
But if you ask them, who are you? Oh, I'm a Marine. First words out of their mouth, or whatever the case is. And they're literally like, that is their entire identity. I like the fact that you brought that up. What has helped you, your identity evolve to what it is today? Or
That's a great question. And in the Marine Corps, that's ingrained in you. You're a Marine. Just like it was ingrained, when I was in the Army, because you're airborne infantry. This is what you do. And they do that for a reason, obviously. But what has helped me was realizing through time that there's other things out there in life to enjoy. What I'm reading has changed. What I'm listening to has changed. The people I surround myself with have changed. Those are big influences on my life. I tell people, and you've probably heard this before, you're the average of 5 people you associate with. Who is in your tribe? Who are you surrounding yourself with? So what helped me through those times was obviously treatment, going through treatment. But what I like to read things now that are inspirational and motivational and self-help stuff. That's helped me and changed my mindset that I can do other things outside of law enforcement. One of the big things I hear from first responders is, a lot of them is, I can't do anything else. I was a cop for a long time, or I was a fireman. And I tell them, I don't know who's telling you this shit, but you can do whatever you want. It's just trying to unlearn what you have learned. Not everybody struggles with that, but a lot of people do. Who are you?
I know a guy that was a cop. He retired, and he ended up going back to school because he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And so he ended up going back to school, getting a nursing degree.
There you go.
And he's a nurse.
And is he happy?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to that, finding some sort of, purpose moving forward, especially for military, first responders, police, and stuff like that. Because, especially in this day and age, it's like you're, and I don't know this because I was never a cop, but I almost feel like that you're kind of constantly wondering, or maybe nervous or scared that, like, okay, could I, end up being in the limelight for some reason? Media obviously does this a lot, and kind of always walking on eggshells now, because you don't know what you can do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, for fear of, somebody right over your shoulder has a cell phone and they're taking a video of you. Next thing you know, it's getting broadcast to the whole entire world, and you're on all the news outlets and so on and so forth. Having to go through that in this day and age is like, got to be really hard. And you obviously retired in 2019.
Yes.
So, you kind of went through that too.
Yeah, I did. But that's the world we live in. And, people videotaping cops and cell phones all over the place. But as long as you're doing the right thing, and you're not out there, doing bad stuff to people, then you're going to be fine. There's always going to be somebody recording you. Cops now, they have body cams, which is good. Some cops don't like them. I've seen more body cams get cops out of trouble than get them in trouble, because a lot of times the body cam will exonerate a cop.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as you're following your policy and procedure and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, I told cops, because I was in charge of cops, just go out there, do your job. Don't let that be first and foremost. Do your job. But, understand if something goes wrong, you make a bad mistake, you're doing something wrong, it's going to be on video.
Yeah.
And cops need to be held accountable if they're doing bad stuff.
Yeah. I don't, it's crazy. Just the amount of like, I don't know. In my head, my son, he's 8 years old, and you ask him today what he wants to do. It's either he wants to be a paramedic or he wants to be a cop. Yeah. And I'm like, man, I really hope you go to be a paramedic.
Well, we need good people in law enforcement. And I always encourage people, be a cop. My son's in the same boat right now. He got out of the Air Force, and, he's thinking about being a cop. And, Yeah, of course, as a parent, I worry about them, and it's a crazy world. It's always been a crazy world, but of course I worry about him, but I'm ultimately going to support his decision. But yeah, I mean, we need good people. The reality is we're not getting, you know, I mean, you guys watch the news, and probably the listeners and the viewers. I mean, we're not seeing the, you know, as far as the recruiting of good people we need now. In law enforcement, fire, corrections, people just don't want to do it. A lot of it is due to the media.
That's what I was going to ask you. What do you think in your assessment of it? What do you think why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's the media, and you know, definitely play a role. Social media, but you got to do your research too. I mean, the reality is that when you see a cop out there that's on the news, maybe he gets into some use of force situation and it makes headline news. That stuff is not happening all the time. Right. I think that's a misnomer. And people, you know, they see the first reel or short that comes on their phone and, oh my God, cops are out there killing everybody. That's not the case. Yeah. I mean, the reality is most cops go through a career without ever discharging their firearm. Yes, they get into use of force tussles and stuff like that. I mean, think about this. There's about 1 million municipal police officers in the country. That's just municipal. That includes NYPD, you know, LAPD. It's not a lot of cops, but then you got the state law enforcement, you got the feds. How many interactions do you think law enforcement has all around the country on a daily basis? I mean, thousands, hundreds of thousands, from arrests to, you know, regular contact. How many of those end up in a use of force that makes headline news? A very, very small percentage. So I think it's a matter of just people educating themselves and not just following the herd and saying, well, yeah, cops are out there doing bad stuff. Are there bad cops? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are bad cops.
Of course,
but the overwhelming majority of them are doing a good job in a very tough environment. I couldn't do it now. Right. I couldn't do it now. It's definitely a different environment, but I admire the men and women who do, and they need to be supported.
For sure.
I relate that to what we went through with the treatment industry back in Florida back 2014 through 2016, whatever it was, with all the client brokering, the Kenny Chapmans of the world, all that.
Did you know who that was?
It rings a bell.
Well, he just got here 3 weeks ago.
But I've been working in behavioral health for a couple of years, but I remember hearing that name.
He's the one that's getting out.
I heard that too. He actually has an episode on American Greed, but he opened a treatment center, and you know, he's a drug dealer, prostituting girls.
Jesus.
Insurance fraud. Like, he was a criminal prior to opening a treatment center.
And he's getting into the treatment game to
it turns
launder
out
and do fraud, probably.
He put it all in his wife's name, and that's why he's getting out. I have to research this to make sure that I'm providing facts, but I'm pretty sure part of the reason he's getting out is because it was all in his wife's name. He set it all up that way. Wow. Absolute criminal. He was sentenced to 28 years.
Jeez.
And it's only been what?
It's been 7 years, something like that.
But he's responsible for a lot of death. But going back to it, like, you know, kind of the wholesale condemnation thing where, you know, people are like, oh, your center's in Florida. We know about you, Florida people. I'm like, it only takes a few bad apples.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because it was all over news media that Florida was this terrible place with treatment centers and send your kid to rehab, they'll come back in a body bag. And that wasn't the truth.
No.
And
it's the same like with first responders, you know. I mean, like I said, there are bad cops out there. Every once in a while you see something on the news and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe the cop did that. But you have to piece it together. Look at it this way. When, you know, we were body cams and you see something on Instagram or something, when you're watching a football game, I love football, and a receiver catches a ball and there's a question on whether or not that receiver had both feet in bounds. How many angles of that do you see?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, you see every friggin' angle. You see on the grass angle. I mean, cops don't get that. So they get like whatever's in front of them with their body cam. They get that angle. But meanwhile, people recording are getting various different angles. So the point is that before you make a judgment out there on something you see right away, you got to put that into perspective. A lot of times the cop is just getting what's in front of them as far as their body cam. You might not see the threat over here or over here. So again, just be wary of that. Mm-hmm. You know, so people like to make quick judgments, and some of them are bad shootings and things like that. But just be wary of taking the first thing you see on Instagram and running with it and saying, well, that cop shot somebody for no reason.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people do. I mean, and the media does this on purpose.
Oh, of course.
It
sells.
They want clicks. And
it sells.
I want to go back to real quick, and for the sake of time, let me ask you this. What you went through prior to calling your sister and really taking that plunge, are you grateful for all that?
Absolutely, 100%.
Why?
Because I wouldn't be here talking to you guys.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here. And that's what, I know you two do the same thing. If you're out there struggling right now, and if you're listening to this show, great show, by the way, I love it.
Thanks.
And just so the listener knows, a pretty pimped out studio right here. I'm a little jealous. If you're struggling out there, and the hardest thing is making that call. And that was the hardest thing for me too, is like I said, my ego, my fear. But do that. There's so much support out there, more than people know. So many organizations, great organizations like yours and mine, that can help you. But yeah, absolutely. I am grateful every day. Every time I wake up in the morning, this is no BS. The first thing I do before I get out of bed is I go through my mind what I'm grateful for. First of all, I'm alive. Second of all is I have a place to live. I got a little bit of food in the fridge, and I'm healthy. I'm still here. Every day above ground is a good day, if you ask me. But when you're struggling, you don't see that. You don't see that. I used to tell people, when I was a cop, and if they were depressed and stuff, cops and other people, just be happy. When you're in a hole and you're hanging on, you guys have been through, you're in recovery, you know what I'm talking about. When you're hanging in a hole and you've got your hands hanging onto the edge, and if somebody walks by and says, hey man, just be happy, that friggin' doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I know that now. I know that. But yeah, absolutely, being grateful, that helps me every day. Being grateful, that kind of sets the tone for the day. And do I live in a bubble? No, I have bad days, but my good days eclipse my bad days, 100%.
Yeah, that's great. So talk a little bit about FHE and what you do for them.
FHE Health, and I work in the Shatterproof program. I was working in business development for a couple of years when I was in Arizona. I relocated down here recently. But FHE Health is a behavioral health facility. We got a bunch of different programs. I work on the first responder track called Shatterproof. I am a Shatterproof community liaison lead now. So I work with the community. I do group sessions. I do some other clinical stuff for the program. I work in marketing. Of course, I have my show. And I just love being on campus because I can hopefully impact and have an impact on campus in the first responder community. Yeah. But it's an amazing program just like yours, and we're helping people.
FHE stands for Florida House Experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. FHE Health.
And they've been around at least 20 years.
Yeah, they've been
right?
around for a little over 20. The Shatterproof program's been around for a little 12 or 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And so we've been around, and we're blessed. We have a growing program. It's inpatient, but we do IOP, PHP, all that stuff. It's a great program. We got people from all around the country coming to see us, and I'm blessed to be a part of it.
Phenomenal reputation. I'll throw that out there. Like I don't give those accolades too much. If generally if somebody's on our show from another center, they usually have a pretty good reputation.
Yeah.
Florida House is one of those.
Yeah. And again, and I tell people, we have an amazing program, not just because, and I was one of those skeptical, guys, like most people going through treatment. But being a first responder, I was like, I'm not friggin' going to treatment. So I would have been the guy, there if I was going through it saying, this place sucks. But not only do I work for him, but it's a great program. So
yeah.
Did you know places like that existed? And let me kind of follow up on that. So for instance, I got a good buddy who I was actually just on the phone with yesterday. Probably about 15 years ago, he went to a state-funded facility for 28 days, which, like, I'm familiar with this place. I'd rather be in jail kind of place. Like, literally, the food in jail is better than this place.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I finally, like, he broke down 3 weeks ago, reached out to me. I got him into a legitimate detox residential program that took his insurance. And I talked to him yesterday on the phone, and he's like, I tell you, and he was with this therapist. He's like, Ben, I completely had no respect for, he said, 28-day programs and treatment because of his prior experience. He's like, I didn't even know anything like this existed. So this guy literally like avoided treatment at all costs, not realizing that an experience like that was even a thing.
Yeah.
He's like, this is not like what I did before.
Yeah.
Did you know that
I
existed?
did not know. I mean, like I said, when through my show, I've had a lot of contacts, and I remember somebody telling me about a treatment center down in Florida, in Deerfield, which turned out to be FHE and Shatterproof. But I didn't know. And a lot of it is just people, it's just education. I mean, educating yourself, word of mouth, and kind of going out there and kind of searching for places. But yeah, I mean, I had no idea until, through my network, I was turned on, or, turned on to FHE and Shatterproof, and landed me down there.
Yeah.
I think this would be good for the listeners to hear, because a lot of times I hear stuff. We talk to a lot of parents, a lot of loved ones trying to, people trying to get into treatment. They're like, oh, I've been on Google for days trying to find the best spot. If you come across our podcast or something like that, reach out to Pat, reach out to us. We literally know these programs. It's
Absolutely.
our job. And I'm not going to send somebody somewhere if they can't come to Rock that is not legitimate, because that would be on my name.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's huge, And for the listener out there, like you mentioned it, we not only have the first responder program, but we have other programs. We have a program, called Thrive. We have a women's empowerment program. That are not first responders, but they're different programs designed for the general population. So if anybody wants to check it out, just go to fhehealth.com. And you can see all the different programs out there that we have.
The other thing about FHE that I'll throw out there, everybody that's familiar with our podcast knows Rock. We're a smaller facility, very. But FHE has more programs. They're larger, separated out programs.
Yeah.
But the benefit to that is the fact that you guys are able to take all kinds of different insurances that we don't take here
Absolutely.
at Rock. I think there's just about almost something for everybody depending on resources, because I just have to state that what needs to be stated. I don't want to blow smoke, and a lot of times getting into these centers, it depends on the resources that you have, which ones you can go to, and you all have a lot of options.
Absolutely. And there, in not every case, but there are cases where in some cases, again, we can scholarship people, meaning we'll pick up the tab, but those are, case-by-case basis. But you're right. We work with all different types of insurance carriers. We're tied into a lot of nonprofits, like in Arizona, where I came from. After I moved from Colorado to Arizona, we're tied into like the 100 Club, which is a club. It's a first responder club for law enforcement. So if somebody, in the 100 clubs in many different states, but somebody maybe can't make their deductible or out of pocket, 100 Club could, we have relationships with them. They can step in and say, all right, well, we're going to help you with this $2,500 deductible to get you down to treatment. So yeah, we have a lot of different, resources we can tap into. The bottom line, and I know going into treatment, a lot of people money is the top of mind, but at FHE, we try to kind of help alleviate that and say, look, we're going to work with you. Because we wouldn't be in business for 20-something years if we were turning everybody away that, financially. I mean, who has thousands of dollars to go to treatment? We still do what we have to do to sustain our business. But we work with a lot of people who struggle with that, who say, look, I got a deductible. Okay, well, we're going to help you with that. We're really good at that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's why, and I say this all the time, that's why I think we're still in business. Because we don't do a lot of scholarshiping on the front end. We scholarship a lot on the back end.
Yeah.
So the insurance cuts out 45 days into your treatment. We're not throwing you to the streets. You're still going to be able to stay with us for 90 days or 120 days. And, we know we're not going to get paid anything, for the second half of your stay, but we commit to you. And that's,
that's what it's about. I mean, you were mentioning, some of these scams out there where people are, it's just a money-making thing. We're all in the business, you, me, to help people. To get them better and to give them the foundation and the tools to lead a productive and healthy life. And we all should be on the same team, which we are. We're all trying to do one thing, and that's help people.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that drives me nuts is, and this tends to be the case with larger centers, somebody's insurance doesn't auth another day, and they literally tell that client, like, oh, you got to be gone today. Like the last thing you want to do is have somebody sitting there for 30 days. They're in the middle. They feel like they're doing well. You pull them in the office. Like you got to give somebody they're going to, every time they absolutely panic. Like I get those phone calls on Google all the time. Oh my God, this place is kicking me out because my insurance wouldn't pay another day. And they just told me this morning and I got to be out by 3. I'm like, how can you do that to somebody?
Why they're getting better. And now they're going to relapse into sending them into a tizzy.
Be a freaking human being.
Yeah,
man.
exactly.
Like, God, drives me nuts. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox for a second.
Well, thanks for coming on, Pat.
You
really
guys rock,
appreciate
man.
it.
Thank you. I got to get you on my show. So.
Yes, and your show is again?
CJ Evolution. You can go to cjevolution.com, find all my shows, all my social, everything.
Okay, and also FHEhealth.com if you want to inquire about treatment for yourself or a loved one. I think they do detox, res, PHP, IOP,
Absolutely.
the whole gamut.
All the above. Just go to the website. You'll find everything you need to know about the various programs, including Shatterproof.
And one thing I love about Florida House, primary mental health.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have substance abuse.
No, that's a good point. So we get that a lot. People calling up saying, hey, I'm just doing, I need to come down there for mental health. Okay. Like to your point.
Yeah.
We could do primary mental health, gambling addiction.
That's good.
People who are struggling with like a pornography addiction. We do all that stuff.
Oh, I didn't realize you did gambling and pornography.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Awesome. All right. Is that it?
You guys rock. Thank you
No
so
pun
much for
intended.
taking the time to let me come on.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again because I'm sure
Absolutely.
there's more that we can talk about. So,
Oh, yeah.
All right. That is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us. info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, it's realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.